Welcome to the launch of the new document, Building Interreligious Solidarity in a Wounded World, a Way of Common Formation. This new document has been developed by a working group related to the World Council of Churches program on interreligious dialogue and cooperation. We are gathered here at the Ecumenical Institute at Bosse and connected globally through live stream. My name is Simone Sinn. I am the academic dean at the Institute here in Bosse and interim coordinator of the Interreligious Dialogue and Cooperation program of the WCC. I will moderate the session this afternoon, and with me are 4 persons who will speak about the theme of this afternoon. And the title of the document already contains 3 key words and phrases: interreligious solidarity, wounded world, and common formation. So this afternoon we will take a deep dive into these words and into the realities behind these words. Now, with us here in the room are students and guests of the Ecumenical Institute. We have Jewish, Muslim and Christian students from different parts of the world. Some of them are here for the certificate course in interreligious studies. Some of you are here for ecumenical studies and currently involved in the intensive English course at Bosse. Some of you are a visiting group who has just arrived from the US, so we are really pleased that we have a quite diverse audience here this afternoon, and we are pleased that many people around the world connect online. Now, before we enter into the conversation about this exciting new document, I would like to mention the people behind, namely those who have been involved in the working group. They have worked tirelessly, patiently and persistently to come up with a common document. All these people have experience in interreligious formation, even though they come from quite different contexts and different faith communities. They are Elena Dini, Bonnie Evans-Hills, Benjamin Kamine, Sivin Kitt, Catherine Laurie, Owen May, Amjad Salem, Michael Wecklin, Mike Waldner, Abraham Wheeler, and Claire Amos, and she is the one who coordinated the working group, and she will be with us also later this afternoon. Now, a big thank you to these persons for their collaborative effort. I would like to call this booklet a wisdom booklet. Why is it a wisdom booklet? Because it comes out of lived experience, and it hopefully flows into lived experience. That's its purpose. It's just a station on the way where we take account of how interreligious formation has been done in different formational settings, take the gist, the deep insight and wisdom that has emerged from the lived experiences of common formation, and then take it further to the next step. You can download this document. It's available on the WCC website. You can download the PDF, and we invite you to read it. Actually, my copy already has many underlining and marking, because I think some of the phrases, some of the sentences are quite concise, sharp, but also inspirational. Now, with me here today, this afternoon, is Reverend Dr. Kusipa Nalvamba. She is the Program Director for Unity, Mission and Ecumenical Formation in the World Council of Churches, and is part of the WCC leadership. Thank you, Kusipa, for coming. And we would like to hear, why is interreligious dialogue and now interreligious solidarity important for the World Council of Churches?
Thank you. I will begin by echoing your thanks to the working group that gathered in 2021 and whose work has today come to fruition, and that we celebrate, and not only celebrate but acknowledge that in the very journey that I'm going to describe, the work that was done has given us momentum towards interreligious solidarity. As you would know, we just came from the Assembly in September 2022, and the Assembly is the highest decision-making body in the World Council of Churches. And out of that came the message of the Assembly, and within that is a very strong affirmation of interreligious solidarity. The Assembly message is titled "A Call to Act Together," and it echoes the words of Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 14 that says, "The love of Christ urges us on." And this is the context of this particular piece of scripture is a call to restoration of unity of those who were historically divided because of cultural and religious hostilities. And so within this message is, the acknowledgement of how religious experience is shaped by, the context in which we happen to operate. And so I would start by affirming, the fact that within this 11th Assembly message, we find, that very strong affirmation towards a common journey with people of goodwill and people, particularly people of faith, so that we work together towards justice, reconciliation, and unity. Now, when you look at the theme itself, the words that are in the theme already suggest, that particular journey. And I'll pick up, the 4 key words in the pilgrimage. One is pilgrimage itself. And within the message, it says, and I quote, "Listening and talking together, we become closer neighbors. Lamenting together, we open ourselves to each other's pain and suffering. Working together, we consent to common action. Celebrating together, we delight in each other's joys and hopes." Justice. The question of justice, is a long-standing, concern, for the WCC. But in this last period, COVID-19, really starkly reminded us of the injustices that are endemic in our societies and the gaps between those who have and those who do not have. And so as we capture, justice within this theme, as the WCC, we recognize the learnings of the pandemic and, take seriously the interreligious solidarity that was witnessed during that period. It didn't matter. We shared our common vulnerability. We shared, our common sense of not knowing what the world, had come to, and we gathered together. And as the injustices emerged, it's a common concern, that we seek to look at in a collaborative and comprehensive approach. The other key word in the theme is reconciliation. Now, reconciliation, again, I quote from the Assembly message, and it says this: "Reconciliation is a movement towards God and towards each other." This implies readiness to build solidarity and to listen to God and to one another intentionally. And so the message continues and says, "A conversation of the heart, from selfishness and apathy to inclusion and service, acknowledging our interdependence with creation." And within that is echoed, some of the common work that we can anticipate. The Assembly strongly affirmed, the importance of looking at climate justice as an issue. And that is where we find common cause among the different faiths. The last word in the theme is unity. And quite often in our self-understanding as Christians, we think of unity as the unity of the churches. But when we think of unity within the context of the oikumene, the whole inhabited world, we think about the unity of all things, the cosmic unity in God. And so within that, we are able to find, those with whom, we share common spiritual as well as, some theological resources for the sake of moving together and for the sake of the flourishing of all people and all of creation. So in terms of interreligious solidarity, then what I would say is that it will cut across everything that we do in the coming period. But particularly if you look at our strategic plan, the 2023 to 2030 strategic plan, I pick up, two programs in particular where this is fully, this is more intentionally expressed. One of which, and not surprisingly, is education and formation. And within that is understood, the journey of a fellowship information, constantly learning. And so we are seeking to recover the ethos of being a learning community, and not just programming learning, but having that orientation. And having that orientation means that we look out for where our blind spots will be pointed out, where we would be enriched with new hermeneutical lenses, for understanding in ways that, we perhaps have not paid attention to, or that are the richness that those who are our interfaith partners actually bring to the table. The second program where this is fully expressed would be within the Interreligious Dialogue and Cooperation program itself, which captures the need to build interreligious solidarity in a global context where the place of religion is being questioned, or there is indifference towards what religion can contribute. But we as people of faith, we affirm that theological competence is competence that is required for building healthy, wholesome societies. And so in that regard, this program that coordinates this work is going to be very strategic for us in terms of reaffirming and reassuring, those with whom we partner that this is important work and it's pivotal to the work that we seek to do in the coming period.
Thank you very much, Kusipa, for this very clear and strong affirmation of the importance of building healthy interreligious relations as part of the pilgrimage of justice, reconciliation, and unity. This is really important. Now, you have provided, so to say, the framework to say that WCC governance has clearly affirmed that. You yourself are also a professor here at the Ecumenical Institute, and you have experienced common formation. What would you say are the elements that make for common formation as we experience it here in Bosse?
This work is necessarily relational. So trust building through living together, talking together. When something is presented as an issue, it's very easy to just rationalize, intellectualize. But when you have encountered a living human being in front of you, it's a very different entry point. And so I would say, the experience here at Bosse provides both. Intellectual stimulation is important, and there is intellectual content in our faiths. But personal encounter and relationship building, that's where, the trust is built. And if you really look at ecumenical experience, it's really transacted through relationships. So building trust for me, comes at the foundation of it.
Thank you, Kusipa. So, as you mentioned, the WCC is at the beginning of a new strategic period, and we very much hope that this booklet I'm holding up again also will inform the next strategic period in how formation, you mentioned it, it's an ethos, it's not just a program, it's an ethos on how we do things in the WCC and with our interreligious partners.
Mm-hmm. One of the hopes that we have is actually to build a baseline course, and I'm hoping, Simone, you will be part of, you will definitely be part of that, to build a resource that is going to provide a baseline course for entry into the WCC, just basic, things that people need to understand to participate meaningfully. And so in that regard, this booklet provides a resource from which we will draw, for that, baseline course. So thank you very much once again to the team that provided this. It's really a prophetic piece of work.
Thank you, Kusipa.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. So I now invite Dr. Claire Amos as the next person to speak to this new document.
Thank you very much, Simona.
Thank you, Claire. It's wonderful to have you. Just let me say who you are. Just two important points. You have been working in the World Council as Program Executive for Interreligious Dialogue and Cooperation for about 7 years. Now you are retired, but you are in very active retirement. You are still working actually with formation, training young people in the Church of England Diocese of Europe. So you're involved in several programs in that. But you have been the coordinator of the working group that developed the booklet. So you are kind of the one who knows kind of from the very initial stage of dreaming about this booklet until the final stage of actually holding the printed booklet in our hands. So I invite you to give us now an introduction.
Thank you very much indeed, Simona. Well, it is a joy and a privilege to be here celebrating what we've called the Way of Common Formation. And in the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to frame what I want to say around thank yous to 3 individuals who between them reflect the beginning, the middle, and the end of the process that has led to today's marking of this booklet, Building Interreligious Solidarity in Our Wounded World, the Way of Common Formation. About 2 years ago, in the second half of 2021, I was invited by the leadership of the World Council of Churches to organise an interreligious conference to be held here at the Ecumenical Institute in Bosse. And the idea was that ideally the conference should have both an academic and a practical focus. So I sent out a general email to friends and colleagues working in the field, inviting them to offer ideas and suggestions as to what the conference might focus on. And it was Canon Jack MacDonald, a colleague in the Church of England Diocese in Europe, who himself is working in Belgium, who winged back a reply within about 30 minutes of getting my request. As part of his ministry in Belgium, Jack has been much involved with the work of an organisation called Emuna Belgium, a project which is aimed at young professionals from all the key religions and life stances represented in Belgium. And there are similar Emuna organisations in other countries like France. The young professionals who work with Emuna are either in training or in the early years of their ministry. Emuna is a year-long program which is spread over 15 full days and a couple of residential periods, in which these representatives of the different religions explore together themes that are both practical and academic that will be important for their future ministries. Jack suggested to me that our conference might explore a range of such educational and training initiatives as Emuna, for which he used the term common formation, a term which, as you obviously will realise by now, we have adopted to describe what became our focus. Once he had said it, Jack's suggestion seemed so right, especially for a conference to be held at the Ecumenical Institute here in Bosse. For the Ecumenical Institute, which, let me remind you, has existed for several years longer than the World Council of Churches itself, has always been a place where common formation has been seen as part of its core purpose. Though, of course, initially, common formation at Bosse focused on representatives of different Christian traditions. But the bringing together of young people, both to learn together and to learn from each other, with the goal of equipping them for leadership in their respective faith communities, is, if I could put it like this, Bosse's essential raison d'etre. What I still refer to, it shows I date myself by this, but what I still refer to as the Bosse Interreligious course, bringing together young representatives of Judaism, Islam and Christianity, has during the last 20 years been a creative development of the ecumenical expression of this that existed from the beginning of Bosse's lifetime. And it's sort of it's a creative development of that ecumenical dimension into an interreligious dimension. As is suggested in this booklet, there are sometimes seen as being two distinct kinds of interreligious dialogue, face-to-face and side-by-side. Face-to-face is when people of different faiths or religions discuss with one another their differences and similarities, and in the process learn more about their interlocutor's faith and perhaps even their own. Side by side implies people of different faiths working together on projects intended to benefit the wider community. Common formation can be understood as bringing together both face-to-face and side-by-side, and in the process can, at its best, actually be transformational, both of individuals and of societies. The booklet deliberately uses the word transformational to describe the ultimate goal of common formation. So, thank you, Jack MacDonald. My only problem with your suggestion was that once you had made it, it seemed so obvious that I kicked myself as to why I didn't think of it first. But then the vision of the ecumenical movement, and perhaps we'd also hope interfaith engagement, has been that we should not only can, but actually ought to learn from one another. The path to holding the conference, about 3 months after the theme was originally suggested, did not run totally smoothly. It was, and is a regret, that what has originally been envisioned as an in-person event found itself caught up in the tentacles of a nasty sting in COVID's tail, and at late notice had to become an online event. But Catherine Laura, from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of the United States, whom we'd invited to be our moderator for the conference, coped with this. Her gentle yet probing style enabled us both during the conference itself and as a working group afterwards, pulling together the insights we had gleaned, to draw together what I consider the meat of the present booklet, the 5 fundamental principles of transformational formation and the 10 practical pointers for initiatives of common formation. I genuinely believe that they offer succinctly some significant pieces of wisdom for future expressions of common formation. You can read and reflect on them for yourselves. If I may just comment on a couple of points. I've already said that a vital vision for common formation is linked to transformation. For me, if religion is to offer a healthy contribution to the life of our world, it needs to be transforming and transformative. But I believe that it can only achieve this if it is willing to be part of a process of self-transformation. I think it's significant that the first of the 5 fundamental principles we set out in the booklet is that of taking responsibility for the sometimes checkered and ambiguous history of our religious communities, acknowledging that we haven't always got it right in the past. Sometimes asking for such self-criticism, as I know from my experience of working in the area of interreligious relations can feel very threatening to people. One of the important aims of common formation must be to establish contexts in which people can feel safe enough to acknowledge their and their faith's vulnerabilities and failures. The other comment that I want to make relates to the 10 practical pointers. I know that as I was working with others to draw them up, I had quite consciously in my mind my experience of working with the Bosse Interreligious course for several years while I was on the World Council of Churches staff. We didn't always manage to realise them. In particular, as this year, parity of numbers that we consider a practical pointer between the three religions represented was sometimes very difficult to achieve. But certainly the need for a generous vision of hospitality was something that those of us who worked with the course were deeply conscious of. So thank you, Kathleen and Laura, for your helpful encouragement in distilling the insights that are offered in this booklet. I will come to the third recipient of my thanks in just a moment, but before I do, I want briefly to note that this is the latest in a series of really useful short booklets, which over the last 12 years, the Interreligious Office of the World Council of Churches has produced, often, generally, working in partnership with others, especially from the Roman Catholic Church. In my mind, the series begins with the 2011 Christian Witness in a Multi-Religious World. And then it includes a booklet called Called to Dialogue, which looks at the differences between the similarities between interreligious and ecumenical dialogue. And then there was Education for Peace, and during the pandemic in 2020, Serving a Wounded World in Interreligious Solidarity, whose title is clearly reflected in the title given to this new document. Perhaps not surprisingly, though, Serving a Wounded World, though Serving a Wounded World is produced from a more intentional Christian perspective, several of what it calls its principles find their echo in the present document. Principles such as humility and vulnerability, respect, community, compassion and the common good, dialogue and mutual learning, repentance and renewal, gratitude and generosity, love. There is something important about the way that over the years, the staff of the Interreligious Office of the World Council of Churches have been able to build the contacts and alliances that they have developed within the wider Christian world and beyond, which have enabled the appearance of these succinct yet sophisticated pearls of wisdom. As someone who myself worked in the World Council of Churches Interreligious Office for 7 years, I know how much of what I did required me to stand on the shoulders of those who had gone before me. I would like to think that in turn, my own shoulders might just be broad enough for others to tiptoe onto them. Not, however, that I exactly think that Simone Sin has stood on my shoulders, nor I, indeed, on hers. I first had the pleasure of getting to know Simona in 2008, before either of us worked for the World Council of Churches. But I've always appreciated Simona's willingness to work collaboratively and unobtrusively with others for the wider good. And that's certainly true in the case of the present document. I thought it was very interesting when Simone read out the list of the members of the working group on page 10, she left one name out, her own. She was part of the working group that followed up the conference and produced this booklet. But Simona deserves particular thanks for her determination that the booklet should not only appear, but also be properly marked and celebrated, as is happening this afternoon. Without her efforts, this event would not be taking place. So my final thank you is to you, Simona, for all you have done to enable what we're doing today. And that is said not only side by side and face to face, but also heart to heart.
Thank you very much, Claire. And thank you especially for your really very deep introduction into the document. The thanking was not part of this original script, but it's welcome. And now I want to ask you, because you have been involved for decades in interreligious formation processes, why have you stayed there? Because some interreligious processes are also difficult, take time and energy. So why is it attractive for you to do interreligious formation?
I think it's bound up with my own life story. I lived in Lebanon during the years of the Civil War, and interreligious dialogue did not feel an optional extra in Lebanon at that time. It felt a matter of life and death, actually. I've also lived in the Holy Land. I've lived in Israel, I've lived in East Jerusalem, I've lived in the Palestinian territories, and I'd also say there too, interreligious dialogue, perhaps not quite to the extreme of Lebanon, but there too, it's not just an academic pursuit. And I've, in a sense, my years in the Middle East were when I was quite young, and so they've kind of shaped the rest of my life, really. I am by background a biblical scholar, and I'm only too aware of the way that Scripture, Christian scripture, but also other religion scriptures, can be both a resource for peace, but also a difficult challenge, and sometimes quite destructive.
Thank you. But we have seen that in some contexts, interreligious relations have been a lived reality for a very long time. In other contexts, that has come only in recent decades, so to say. But now today, in a globalized world, we see that this is important. What role do you think plays context in these interreligious formation processes?
I think one of the ways in which context plays into things is, I think, grasping the whole question of minority and majority situations, and the numerical balances inevitably affects how you engage with interreligious dialogue issues. I mean, in situations in which one religion is very much a majority religion, as it is, I would say, still in most parts of Europe. You know, it's a different situation to context in which there is much more of a balance in numbers. I mean, sometimes that balance in numbers is itself very, very difficult. I mean, as you know, the World Council of Churches, and certainly when I was working at the World Council of Churches, we engaged with the interreligious context of Nigeria. And Nigeria is a country that's very much on my heart. And one of the reasons that Nigeria is so difficult is precisely because the number of adherents of the two main faiths in that country are so equally balanced. So there are issues like that. But for me, a very powerful one is this sense of sort of wanting religions to be willing, in a way that I think many of them find it very difficult to do, to acknowledge their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, and their failures. There's something almost intrinsic in religion that finds it difficult to do that.
Yes, thank you. And when you said it in your introduction that the very first of the 5 commitments is taking responsibility. And that is not a general advice. It's that profound, self-reflective commitment to take responsibility for one's own histories and also challenges. Sure. So thank you very much, Claire. This was a wonderful introduction, and I think it will invite everybody to read the document. And it also showed that the document didn't come only out of one context, but really comes out of a dialogue between different contexts and hopefully leads back into different contexts. So thank you very much, Claire. So the next person that I would like to invite to come and sit next to me is Rabbi Margot Hughes Robinson, and she comes to us from New York. You are the New York rabbinic organizer of Truah, the rabbinic call for human rights. And currently you are here in Bosse as one of the participants in the certificate course on interreligious studies. So I've invited you also to speak, first of all, because you're a practitioner of interreligious dialogue, cooperation. What has been important for you to see common formation, common learning processes as a richness and asset for people?
Absolutely. And I want to begin by just expressing tremendous gratitude to the WCC, to the Ecumenical Institute, and also to you, Simona, to be part of the certificate program and also part of this conversation. So I'll share a little bit for context about my background as a practitioner of interreligious encounter. It really began when I was in seminary in the 5 or 6 year long process of studying for rabbinic ordination. And initially I was very nervous to engage in interreligious dialogue. It's a very vulnerable thing, especially when you're in that sort of very tender moment of formation, of identity formation as a leader, or even just identity formation as a young adult stepping into a religious life. And I grew up in places also with very strong Christian religious or cultural majorities that were expressed in very different ways, but that were very palpable, both in France and in the American South. I passed the first day I came here to the Ecumenical Institute, the picture of Billy Graham visiting Bosse, and I was like, oh, my landsmen were from the same state. My landsmen, I would say in Yiddish. But I had a number of experiences in seminary. It was sort of the ball started rolling, and it was almost impossible to stop it. Partially because I think the fruits of it were so rich. I happened to study Talmud for the very first time with an Episcopal priest who was getting her PhD, and we became Talmud study partners in 2014. And several years later, when I was living in New York, she was working at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine with the Episcopal Church, and invited me to start and lead a Christian-Jewish Bible study, sort of according to every week the Jewish lectionary calendar. And out of that grew experiences with the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore. And I also worked for the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue at my seminary for 2 years, which involved some collaboration with UN Women, as well as some work in the Holy Land during the 2 years I was living there. But really all of these things became a huge part of the work that I do now as an organizer of clergy, because so much of my work at Truah, mobilizing Jewish clergy for human rights, is by necessity done in a multi-faith and an interreligious context, particularly the work that we're involved in ending mass incarceration in the United States, whether it's hyper-local work in New York, seeking the closure of Rikers Island, to sort of the national legislation that was actually just introduced yesterday to end solitary confinement in the U.S. Truah, sort of by necessity, takes our cues from directly affected people, and that often means our Christian, Muslim siblings of color. Just because of the context of the UN. I'll share also the family that I'm a part of in the U.S. My sister-in-law just got married to a Soka Gakkai Buddhist young man and had a sort of interfaith, multi-faith ceremony. And my brother-in-law and his wife are both ministers in the United Church of Christ, and my wife married a rabbi. So I think that my father-in-law sometimes sits there at family gatherings sort of being like, look at what we've done. We're living it.
Thank you very much for sharing some of your practical work. What you mentioned about the work of Truah actually is combining what Claire introduced to us, face to face and side by side.
Yes.
So you are together with partners of other faiths to work for a common cause, and by that work for common cause, common advocacy, you also get to know one another more deeply and more profoundly on a relational level. So thank you for these very concrete examples. Now, I have shared with you the booklet beforehand, yes. So you had kind of a sneak preview. So how does your own experience relate to what is in the booklet?
I found a really deep resonance with the booklet. I felt like every time I was turning the page, it was like, oh, like, yes! It's such a, I think, distillation of things that I have found so important in my own work, and also places in which, you know, I desperately wish to continue to grow, both as a clergy person and as a practitioner of interreligious dialogue. The way that the booklet highlights the necessity of the respect for diversity among faith traditions, but also within faith traditions, which has been actually such an enjoyable part even of our first week here at the Ecumenical Institute in the certificate program, is seeing the like diversity, you know, within traditions, but then even within sub-movements or within sort of sub-confessions of faith, as well as the really deep emphasis on relationship. Right, I'm a relational organizer in my work. It's always relationship first. But I also really appreciated the acknowledgement that this is not a neutral process, that this book makes so explicit the need to talk about power, to talk about history, to talk about you know, how to place yourself sort of both in the intersection of time and of place when we meet one another in relationship and in dialogue in this way, right? I, as a Jew and as a rabbi, certainly come to interreligious dialogue not just as an academic discipline or even a mystical expression of unity, which I definitely feel very strongly, but also in a world with increasing anti-Semitism. For me, it's about safety also, for myself, for my family, for my community. And I appreciate the way that that's made so explicit, that the commingling of politics and religion, they've never been atomized or isolated in world history, and to acknowledge that going in and provide meaningful tools that integrate that understanding is part of what I think makes this publication so essential. And I really think interreligious competency is just a necessary part of being a faith leader in the 21st century. So many of these skills are the same skills for peacemaking, for coalition building. I think there's something even about in the face-to-face and side-by-side, the fact that we're living together even in the 3-week experience of the certificate program. You know, it's a chance to practice on such a small scale and in, I won't say there's no such thing as a safe space, right? But in a brave space and a place that is sort of removed from our everyday lives, a chance to sort of have these fibers of mistakes and then repair and return in the small and relational scale to really weave together an authentic relationship, that it's much easier right here in the beautiful Swedish countryside and in a small group to say, you know, I made a mistake, or I misspoke, or I did it, I'm sorry, or even I'm trying on an idea, but it doesn't mean I'm taking it on as my personal identity forever. It's a way to build that muscle in a way that I'm really excited to bring back to my own context.
Thank you so much, Margot. I think in what you said, we could sense and feel that we live in a wounded world. You have given examples, and we experience this also in the encounter, in the formation processes, the vulnerability. But I really like your expression that we need to create brave spaces in order to empower people to live through, not to go around, but to live through the difficult moments. So thank you very much, Rabbi Margot, and we look forward continuing to learning together here in Bosse.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. So I now invite the final panelist for this afternoon, Dr. Zainal Abidin Bagir. I'm really pleased that you could come to the certificate program here in Bosse. You are a lecturer now during this week, introducing Islam to this interreligious formation group. Back home in Indonesia, where you come from, you are the director of the Indonesian Consortium of Religious Studies, which is an interesting PhD program because it is a collaboration of 3 different institutions of different faith backgrounds. So you back home in Indonesia come also with experience of common formation in the academic arena. So my question to you is, how do you look at common interreligious formation? What is your experience?
Yeah. Okay. Well, probably I should introduce the idea behind the consortium first. So it's a consortium, it's an academic program. The consortium is of 3 universities, 1 non-religiously affiliated university, which is my university, and then an Islamic university and a Christian university. It's Faculty of Theology. And I think it is unique, probably not only in Indonesia, but also I don't find it in many other places. So we have the master's program as well as the PhD program. But to repeat what has been said several times, interreligious studies is not simply an intellectual endeavor. It is something more. So it's not merely academic. And when I read this, I also find so many things resonate with my experience. So other than doing, offering these academic degrees on interreligious studies or religion and cross-cultural studies, we also train activists, whether that's activists of interreligious dialogue or civil society organizations, activists and others. And very similar experience coming up again and again and again. And many of them I found here. So I think well, it's been mentioned several times now, but probably I have to mention a few things which resonate with my experience. Well, first of all, the beginning of this small book, it mentions the classic fourfold division of dialogue. Probably I should just read it quickly. The dialogue of life, the dialogue of social action, the dialogue of theological exchange, and the dialogue of religious experience. And I found that sometimes people think that in this kind of dialogue, the theological or the intellectual comes first, and the practical is a kind of implementation of that. But from my experience, that's not always the case. I mean, there's no such hierarchy, there's no such order. In many cases, actually, the practical needs to come first, because you are in communication with other people, and trust needs to come first before you can learn anything from others. So, and it's much easier to work together rather than talking to each other. Sometimes talking to each other is so difficult. I mean, I am misunderstood, or I am misunderstand others, etc. But working together, that's usually, practical things. Usually, that opens the way for further conversation. So I think that's the first thing. I like also here the emphasis on the practical. And then related to that, the other very interesting point mentioned here is about building relationship. And well, it's related to the issue of trust, that formation is not again not only cognitive issues. It's more than that. And how do you do that? You do that by living together. Well, you mentioned. You told me about what you are trying to do here in Bosse. It's about building a community. So this year, 7 people in one place. And I should say an isolated place, so it's not easy to escape from here, but a very beautiful place. But I think that's really what is needed. I mean, because also actually in the master's program, in the PhD program, which I'm directing it now, I think people learn more, not in the classroom, but through person-to-person interaction. So during the lunchtime, so eating together, playing together, laughing together, that's what opens the door for more understanding. And I think that's really commendable that that is what you are trying to do here at BOSI. So even at the PhD level, I mean, probably you think PhD level is all about doing research, etc. But in my experience, since our students, they come from different, different parts of Indonesia, different parts of the world, different religious background, etc. And many of them, they didn't have the space to meet each other. And they found it in this academic space. But I think they learn more outside the classroom rather than in the classroom. So, yeah, I think that's another point which I think needs to be, we need to put emphasis. The last thing, which when I read it, which really, I mean, the point which attract me is, I think, a reminder that the work of formation is actually also a work of transformation. So formation is transformation. And that's a rather dangerous business. I mean, transformation. I mean, because you need to be open to be changed by others as well as changing others. So one point here, there's a point about respect. And sometimes I think respect means respecting boundaries. But I think in a real inter-religious dialogue or formation, it also involves questioning boundaries, including our own boundaries. And this is what I say, it's risky. But if we are prepared to do that, then the reward is also, I mean, it's waiting for us out there. So, and I think without being open to that possibility of being changed or being transformed, yeah, what's the use of, I mean, this kind of conversation if we are not open to that kind of transformation? So, yeah, so probably as a kind of a reminder, well, I think we agree here that dialogue is not simply being nice, but it's also about challenging ourselves as well as others. And yeah, it comes with a risk. I think 2 or 3 years ago we published a book with the title Costly Tolerance. So tolerance doesn't come with I mean, it's not free, it's costly. I mean, you sometimes you need to sacrifice certain things. So, yeah, I think these are some of the points which I want to underline here.
Thank you very much, Zainal. It is wonderful to hear how this text you have not been involved at all in the production of the text, but it finds resonance with many of your own experiences and reflection. And we really hope that the booklet empowers people to to engage more in common formation, so that we have many centers like BOSE, like your consortium, different initiatives locally and across different contexts, where people dare to enter into these risky processes. And again, I think that the title, Building Interreligious Solidarity, is the key word. This should guide us. So it's not just out of personal interest or just what I do for myself, but there is a profound relationality, and there is a profound commitment for working towards justice and peace, as we say. So I think these commitments are also very important. So it's wonderful to hear your affirmation on the booklet. And as I want to conclude this launch, I want to underline two things. We have produced a short booklet. We hope that people will use it locally, probably also translate it into your languages locally, so that you can share it with others in your context. But we also want to hear from your experiences, and you're invited to send an email to the WCC. It's the media@wcc/coe.org email that you can write to and share your experiences. I want to mention at the end of the booklet we find some examples of interreligious formation, but probably in a second edition of this booklet we will add more examples, because we want to strengthen this work, and we want to strengthen collaboration among the different programs and centers for interreligious formation. So please don't be shy, contact us, let us know about your own program and your formation processes that you're involved in. Thank you very much for joining this launch, and enjoy reading this new document. Thank you.